Layla lived in a small, sun-kissed village tucked between rolling hills and flowering meadows. From the moment she could walk, her gentle nature and keen intelligence shone brightly. She helped her neighbors, tended small gardens, and learned the arts of storytelling, sewing, and healing from the elders. Villagers admired her for her quick mind and her kind heart, and children followed her eagerly when she narrated tales of the forests and rivers. Layla's father, although hardworking and devoted, often lost himself in his business affairs, leaving Layla vulnerable to the subtle cruelties of her stepmother, Selma. Selma was a woman of striking appearance, tall and proud, with eyes sharp and calculating. She had married Layla's father for security and status but quickly realized that Layla's presence threatened her. The villagers' admiration, the father's pride in his daughter, and Layla's natural charm stirred a deep envy within Selma. Unlike Layla, she lacked genuine warmth. Her cleverness often served schemes and manipulation rather than kindness. The contrast between her bitterness and Layla's gentle demeanor festered within the walls of their modest home, creating a tension invisible to outsiders but palpable within every corner of the house. Every morning, Layla would rise before the sun, sweeping the small courtyard and tending the tiny garden her father had planted. Her stepmother, meanwhile, would watch from the doorway with a tight smile that never reached her eyes, plotting ways to belittle her stepdaughter without revealing herself. Selma took pride in her cunning, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of controlling Layla's daily life, yet fearing that the girl's virtues would someday expose her own inadequacies. The household was small but orderly. Wooden beams lined the ceilings and clay pots hung from hooks near the hearth. Sunlight streamed through small windows, casting warm patterns on the worn floors. Layla took joy in simple things: the scent of fresh bread, the whisper of the wind through the open shutters, and the laughter of the village children when they passed by. Every act of kindness she extended, however, was met with Selma's calculated attempts to undermine her confidence. Selma's envy was a quiet fire, burning steadily beneath polite smiles and hollow praises. She would tell Layla, with a tone of false concern, that she was too delicate to handle certain chores or too naive to interact with the village. When Layla offered advice or assistance, Selma would dismiss her ideas, claiming that her stepdaughter was still a child and should leave matters to adults. Every word, every gesture, was intended to chip away at Layla's spirit, yet the girl's resilience was like a hidden spring. No matter how much pressure was applied, her gentleness and intelligence remained intact. Despite the coldness in Selma's eyes, Layla remained forgiving. She could sense the emptiness behind her stepmother's actions and chose not to meet cruelty with anger. Her father, distracted by the burdens of life, noticed the subtle tension but believed it to be ordinary family disagreements. He often praised Layla for her helpfulness and skill but never fully understood the quiet suffering imposed by Selma's envy. In the evenings, when the chores were done and the household settled, Layla would sit near the small hearth, her hands working diligently on a piece of embroidery or sketching the landscapes she loved. The flames danced gently across the walls, painting soft shadows that seemed to comfort her. Selma would observe from a distance, her face a mask of false serenity, while her heart filled with quiet rage at the girl who seemed untouchable despite the household's strict rules. Layla's intelligence was not limited to her domestic skills. She had a way of understanding people that was both empathetic and insightful. When villagers came seeking help, she could discern the true nature of their troubles and offer solutions that impressed even the elders. Selma, aware of this, grew increasingly unsettled. Every compliment Layla received, every grateful smile from the villagers, fanned the flames of envy that simmered within her. Yet Layla's spirit remained unbroken. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her head held high despite the undercurrents of resentment swirling around her. Even when Selma's words were sharp and her actions cruel, Layla found solace in the beauty of the world around her: the chirping of morning birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the calm of a river reflecting the sky. She nurtured an inner strength that Selma could not touch, a resilience born of kindness and courage that would eventually reveal itself in ways the stepmother could never anticipate. Every day the tension between Layla and Selma thickened like a storm cloud, silent yet heavy. The modest home, with its simple furnishings and sunlit corners, became a stage where envy and virtue silently clashed. Layla, aware of her stepmother's intentions but unafraid, continued to live with gentleness, intelligence, and hope. The quiet strength she carried was invisible to the eye but undeniable to the heart, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test courage, resilience, and the power of inner goodness. In this small village home, under the shadow of Selma's envy, Layla's true character flourished like a hidden bloom. Her kindness, intelligence, and beauty were not simply traits admired by others. they were shields forged in the quiet fires of resilience. Every day she survived with grace, and every night she carried hope that goodness, no matter how oppressed, would find its way to the light. The tension in the household, though oppressive, could not suppress the luminous spirit that dwelled within the girl named Layla. From the earliest days of her adolescence, Layla began noticing subtle changes in Selma's behavior. Tasks that had once been shared fairly were now assigned with an undercurrent of malice. Selma would instruct Layla to carry heavy buckets of water from the river at dawn, insisting it was part of her training, while she herself performed lighter, more comfortable chores. When Layla questioned the reasoning, her stepmother would give a sharp, disapproving look, a thinly veiled warning that any complaint would only worsen her burden. Beyond the household work, Selma's cruelty extended into the public eye. Whenever neighbors or passing villagers visited, Selma would belittle Layla under the guise of playful teasing. "You try so hard, but some things are just too big for you, dear," she would say with a tight smile, exaggerating her stepdaughter's mistakes in front of others. The villagers, accustomed to Selma's commanding presence, sometimes laughed awkwardly, never fully realizing that the girl they admired was being undermined behind a mask of propriety. Even within the confines of the home, Selma worked meticulously to isolate Layla. Invitations from friends in the village were met with stern refusals. Selma would claim that the village streets were unsafe or that Layla's presence at gatherings would embarrass the family. She even went as far as to misplace letters and messages from friends, intercepting any opportunity for connection beyond the house. Each act of control was subtle, designed not to arouse suspicion but to leave Layla feeling small and dependent, a clever trap meant to weaken the girl's spirit without drawing attention to Selma's cruelty. Despite the growing tension, Layla's innate kindness and intelligence remained her anchor. She noticed the malice, the calculated whispers, and the dangerous chores, yet she responded not with anger or fear but with calm determination. Her approach was patient. She learned to navigate the treacherous household with awareness, treating even her stepmother with respect when possible, careful to avoid inflaming Selma's temper while maintaining her own dignity. At night, after the work was done and the household settled, Layla would retreat to a small corner by the hearth, her sanctuary amid the storm. There she reflected on the day's events, thinking through each encounter with Selma. She practiced silent strategies to keep herself safe, sometimes rearranging chores subtly to avoid unnecessary danger, or finding moments to quietly connect with friends and neighbors despite her stepmother's restrictions. Friends and neighbors, unaware of the full extent of Selma's schemes, occasionally noticed Layla's calm endurance. Some attributed it to patience or innate wisdom, while others simply assumed that life in the household was stricter than usual. Layla, however, understood the deeper currents of envy and fear that guided Selma's actions, sensing that her stepmother's malice was not mere cruelty but a deliberate attempt to control, diminish, and harm her. Even as danger shadowed her daily life, Layla's forgiving nature allowed her to continue treating others with warmth. She helped younger children with their lessons, offered advice to neighbors, and tended to the small garden patches with care, never allowing Selma's bitterness to taint her interactions with the world outside the house. Each act of kindness reinforced her inner strength, building a quiet resilience that Selma could not break with mere chores or insults. The household grew heavier with tension as Selma's plots escalated, yet Layla moved through each day with grace, aware of the dangers but refusing to let fear rule her. She knew that the malicious energy around her, though threatening, could never extinguish her spirit. In the shadows of envy and whispered threats, Layla's kindness and intelligence remained steadfast, quietly preparing her for the challenges that awaited and the eventual triumph that her courage and wisdom would bring. The morning air was crisp, yet an unnatural tension hung over the household. Selma, consumed by envy and impatience, had waited for the earliest light to execute her cruel plan. She entered Layla's room silently, a cruel smile playing across her lips, carrying flammable oils and scraps of paper soaked in fire-starting agents. Layla, still curled beneath her thin blanket, was unaware of the danger, her mind caught in dreams of simple joys and quiet mornings tending the garden. Selma moved with practiced stealth, igniting the small pile of flammable material near Layla's bed. The fire hissed as it caught, sending a wisp of smoke curling toward the ceiling. Layla awoke instantly to the acrid scent of burning fibers, her heart hammering in shock. Flames licked the edges of her small room, and the heat pressed against her skin like a living force. Panic surged, yet her mind, honed by days of navigating Selma's cruelty, acted with surprising clarity. She leapt from the bed, stumbling over scattered clothes and household items, instinct driving her toward the narrow window that offered her only hope of escape. As she stepped closer to the blaze, something extraordinary occurred. The flames, instead of searing her skin, twisted and danced around her form. They recoiled from her touch and seemed to bend to her presence, forming arcs and waves that circled protectively. Layla froze, her terror giving way to awe. Every instinct screamed danger, yet the fire did not harm her. Instead, it illuminated her in a warm, almost sacred glow. Selma, watching from the doorway, could scarcely believe her eyes. Her plan, executed with precision and cruelty, was unraveling before her. The fire, her instrument of destruction, obeyed neither her intentions nor the natural laws she assumed it followed. Layla, sensing the protective energy, reached out tentatively, and the flames responded, forming gentle spirals around her hands, tracing her movements like a living extension of her being. Panic turned into wonder as Layla realized the truth. The fire was no ordinary flame. It had a consciousness of its own, attuned to her courage and the purity of her spirit. The room, once meant to be her tomb, became a theater of luminous patterns, the walls flickering with golden light that reflected her astonishment. Heat remained present but harmless, like the warmth of a sunbeam rather than a consuming blaze. Selma's fury grew as she attempted to approach, but the fire shifted in response to Layla's fear and determination, creating a living barrier between stepmother and stepdaughter. Each step Selma took was met with a graceful arc of fire that refused to obey her commands, instead forming shapes that seemed almost protective of Layla. The house itself became a landscape of flickering guardianship, shadows dancing with a rhythm that mimicked heartbeat and breath. Realizing she could not breach the mysterious defense, Selma retreated, her envy and rage mingling with confusion. Layla, still trembling, took a hesitant step forward. The flames responded with a gentle surge, wrapping her in a cocoon of light. She tested the limits, moving through the room, and the fire followed, ebbing and flowing like a loyal companion. By the time the first villagers arrived, drawn by the smoke and shouts, Layla was standing in the center of the room, unharmed, surrounded by the protective dance of fire. The flames, though still ablaze, had become her allies, a visible testament to her resilience and the mysterious bond she shared with them. No one could explain the phenomenon, yet all sensed that Layla's spirit had awakened a force far greater than Selma's cruelty. In that moment, Layla understood that the fire had recognized her as its master, its loyalty bound not to fear or punishment, but to the courage and purity that resided within her. And from that dawn forward, the flames would wait, patient and vigilant, for the call of their chosen guardian. After the terrifying morning blaze, Layla stood in her small room, surrounded by the gentle crackle of flames that refused to burn her. Her pulse still raced, but a strange calm settled over her as she realized the fire was no longer a threat. It was alive, responsive, and almost sentient. It swirled around her in golden ribbons, casting playful shadows on the walls, as though testing her courage and observing her intentions. Tentatively, Layla reached out her hand. The fire curved around her fingers, forming soft arcs that did not singe her skin. It seemed to mirror her motions, rising and falling as her hand moved. She whispered a shaky greeting, unsure if the flames could understand her, and for a moment the air stilled. Then, with a subtle flare, the fire leapt slightly higher, almost as if nodding in acknowledgement. Her heart swelled with awe and a cautious sense of companionship. She experimented, waving her hands, spinning in the center of the room, and the flames danced accordingly, flowing like ribbons of gold, wrapping her protectively while keeping a careful distance. Layla realized the fire was intelligent, responding not to commands alone, but to her emotions, her fear, her hope, and the quiet strength she had nurtured despite Selma's cruelty. Over the next days, Layla began to test this newfound connection. She whispered stories into the fire, tales of her childhood, of her mother she barely remembered, and of her dreams for a world free of Selma's oppression. Each time she spoke, the flames flickered and shifted, forming shapes. The outline of a bird in mid-flight, the curve of a river, the face of a wolf watching protectively. It was as if the fire understood her words and translated them into living symbols. Layla soon discovered that her thoughts and intentions could guide the fire. When she felt fear or doubt, the flames tightened around her, shielding her from any danger or imagined threat. When she felt hope or courage, they expanded, illuminating the room like a sunbeam and filling her with warmth and confidence. The fire became both mirror and mentor, reflecting her inner self and teaching her to trust her instincts. She also noticed that the fire reacted to Selma's presence differently. Whenever her stepmother entered the house with malice in her eyes, the flames shifted, creating barriers and moving unpredictably, protecting Layla without a single word from her. It was as though the fire recognized the difference between threat and trust, aligning itself with Layla's sense of justice and intuition. Night after night, Layla practiced, learning to communicate subtly with the fire. Simple gestures, a raised hand, a circle drawn in the air, a whispered word, elicited responses from the living flames. They formed shapes, arcs, and gentle barriers, always attentive, always protective. She began to understand the rhythm of their movement, feeling their energy as if it were an extension of her own body, a partner in her survival and her resilience. By the end of the week, Layla realized something profound. The fire was her guardian, bound not by magic alone, but by recognition of her spirit. It responded to her courage, her compassion, and the clarity of her intentions. She was no longer a passive victim of Selma's cruelty. She had an ally powerful and loyal, a force that would wait for her call and obey her will. With this understanding, Layla stood tall, feeling the flames wrap around her like a living cloak of protection. She whispered a word of thanks, and the fire responded with a bright flare, illuminating the room in a protective, radiant glow. In that moment, Layla understood that she and the fire were now united, and that together they could face whatever Selma, or the world, might try to throw against her. Layla quickly realized that the fire was more than just a guardian, it was a teacher and companion, alive with intelligence and instinct. Each day, as she moved through her chores and studied in secret, the flames would curl around her with awareness, responding to her intentions. When she approached a broken pot or a stack of kindling, the fire would shift, forming arcs and spirals that illuminated her way, guiding her movements as if showing her how to navigate the world with precision and care. The flames began to take on shapes that reflected her thoughts and emotions. One morning, when Layla felt a surge of hope, they formed the outline of a bird taking flight, wings stretched wide, hovering above her hands. On other days, when she focused on her desire for safety, the fire would form a protective ring, moving in graceful patterns that shielded her from harm. Even in the darkest corners of the house, the fire's light seemed to respond to her calmness, glowing steadily and repelling shadows of fear. Selma, unaware of the fire's sentience, continued her small acts of malice, tripping Layla, hiding her belongings and whispering threats. Yet the fire's presence turned each act of cruelty into futility. When Selma reached for a candle to burn Layla's books, the flames reacted instinctively, flaring and forming a barrier that prevented her hand from reaching the items. When Selma tried to frighten Layla by stomping on the floor or rattling doors, the fire would ripple in playful waves, alerting Layla and deflecting any harm. Each attempt at cruelty only revealed the fire's loyalty and intelligence. Layla noticed something extraordinary. The fire did not respond to anger or aggression, even when Selma's attacks made her heart pound with fear. It responded to focus, calmness, and clarity of mind. If Layla panicked, the flames would hesitate, flickering unpredictably. If she centered herself and approached situations with courage and purpose, the fire moved with fluid precision, performing delicate arcs and forming intricate shapes that mirrored her inner strength. This lesson quickly became clear. The fire was a reflection of her spirit. It flourished alongside her courage and patience and became unpredictable when guided by fear or malice. As days turned into nights, Layla began experimenting with the fire, discovering that she could influence its movements with subtle gestures and soft whispers. She would trace patterns in the air with her fingers, and the fire would follow, forming glowing trails and luminous shapes. Sometimes the fire would manifest figures, protective wolves, birds, or abstract symbols, always reacting to her focus and intentions. These forms seemed to anticipate her thoughts, appearing before she fully formed an idea, guiding her actions and providing both inspiration and protection. She also discovered the fire's ability to communicate warnings. If Selma approached with ill intent, the flames would shimmer in a specific rhythm, creating soft arcs or sparks that warned Layla of impending danger. In these moments, Layla learned to trust her companion implicitly, understanding that it would act not only to protect her but to teach her patience, awareness, and foresight. Through her growing connection, Layla realized that the fire's power was intertwined with her own. It was not an independent force to be commanded blindly. It responded to her spirit, her calm courage, and her focus on justice and survival. The more she nurtured these qualities, the stronger and more responsive the flames became. They were a living extension of herself, a guardian, guide, and mentor all in one. By the end of the week, Layla felt a profound bond with the fire. It was no longer just protection against Selma's cruelty, it was a mirror of her inner strength, a force that grew with her courage and clarity of purpose. The flames had become her teacher, her ally, and her friend, waiting for her command, understanding her intentions and ready to manifest her will at a moment's notice. Layla had discovered that true power lay not in the fire alone, but in the harmony between her spirit and the guardian that answered to it. Farid was a quiet boy, curious and observant, known in the village for his gentle demeanor and keen eyes. He had always admired Layla from afar, noticing her kindness and the subtle grace in her movements, yet he knew little of the cruelty she endured at home. One evening, while walking past her modest house, he glimpsed a flickering light through the cracks of her window. It was different from ordinary candlelight, dancing and shimmering with a rhythm almost alive. He paused, sensing something extraordinary. The following nights, Farid returned, more attentive. The unusual glow persisted, sometimes rising and falling like the pulse of a living heart. Occasionally he heard soft whispers in the wind, faint but distinct, almost like the murmur of a conversation he could not fully understand. He suspected that the girl within the house was not alone, that some unseen presence watched over her. Farid's curiosity deepened, mingled with concern, and he resolved to offer silent support. Without confronting Layla directly, he began leaving small gifts outside her door. Sometimes it was a bundle of fresh herbs from his mother's garden, known for their soothing scent and restorative qualities. Other times he left a bottle of clean water, recognizing that her household chores likely left her tired and thirsty. Occasionally he placed simple notes, small scraps of parchment inscribed with encouraging words and drawings of flowers or stars, hoping to convey that someone beyond her walls cared for her well-being. Farid's actions were cautious. He never made his presence known directly, aware that the household's atmosphere was tense and dangerous. Yet he felt drawn to help, sensing the extraordinary circumstances around Layla. The moment she discovered his gifts, Layla's heart lifted with quiet gratitude. She realized that the outside world still held kindness and support, and that she was not entirely alone in her struggle. The magical fire that had come to protect her seemed to respond to Farid's offerings as well. When she touched the herbs or read the notes, the flames would shimmer brighter, forming protective arcs or glowing shapes that reflected joy and reassurance. The presence of goodwill from the outside amplified the fire's power, strengthening the bond between Layla and her mystical guardian. Each act of kindness became a spark in the flame, weaving a connection that went beyond mere protection. It became a symbol of trust and hope. As days turned to nights, Layla began to look forward to these small gestures. They reminded her that courage and gentleness could inspire loyalty and care, even from those who had never fully seen her before. Farid, unaware of the magic he had helped nurture, continued his quiet acts of compassion, leaving gifts and observing from a distance. The fire's glow, once solitary, now danced with a renewed brilliance, reflecting the unseen hands of a kind neighbor. Through these simple interactions, Layla felt the growing power of connection, the way a single act of kindness could amplify courage and protectiveness. She realized that while the fire responded to her spirit, it also resonated with goodness in the world, reinforcing the bond between her inner strength and the love that quietly surrounded her. Each flicker of light became a reminder that compassion, even in small gestures, had the power to strengthen resilience, empower the vulnerable, and build bridges between hearts separated by fear or circumstance. Farid's presence, though distant, had a profound effect. The fire's protective dance grew more intricate, forming shapes that mirrored the gentle care he had offered, birds perched on branches, protective circles, and glowing symbols of hope. Layla's understanding deepened. The magic was not hers alone, but shared with those who acted with kindness and intent. She was no longer merely protected. She was strengthened by the invisible bonds of trust and empathy, learning that courage and hope could be nurtured through acts as simple as herbs, water, or a heartfelt note. Selma paced restlessly through the dim corridors of their modest home, her hands trembling and her face flushed with panic. The plan she had so meticulously crafted to subdue Layla and assert her dominance had failed at every turn. Each attempt, whether a cruel task, a hidden trap, or a burst of harsh words, was met with resistance that she could not explain. Objects that should have harmed Layla either moved aside or burst into harmless sparks, and the fire that she had hoped would consume her stepdaughter seemed to mock her efforts, wrapping around Layla protectively. Every morning, Selma awoke with a growing sense of dread. The house no longer felt like her domain. It vibrated with an unseen power that she could neither control nor predict. Even the villagers began whispering about the strange glows from the windows and the faint, dancing lights that seemed to move with a will of their own. Rumors of Layla's supernatural protection reached her ears, spreading fear among her peers and neighbors. The very magic she had tried to suppress now seemed to strengthen her stepdaughter, and each whispered tale gnawed at her composure. Selma's envy, once simmering quietly, escalated into full-blown terror. She realized that Layla's resilience was not merely a product of patience or skill, it was a force beyond her understanding. The fire, her greatest instrument of cruelty and imagination, was now a shield that defied all her control. Her confidence eroded with each passing night as she watched flames curl protectively around Layla, forming shapes and patterns that seemed deliberate, almost intelligent. Even her attempts to confront the girl directly were thwarted by the glowing guardianship, leaving her frustrated and humiliated. At times, Selma would hide in corners, watching Layla move through the house with an almost ethereal grace. The flames followed her silently, twisting around corners and walls, ensuring no harm could come. Fear gripped Selma's heart as she realized that her stepdaughter had not only survived her schemes but had emerged stronger, as if every act of malice had fueled the fire rather than extinguished it. Each night, Selma's imagination conjured darker possibilities, the fire rising in rebellion, the house turning against her, the villagers seeing her true cruelty exposed. The panic became obsessive. Selma could no longer eat, could not sleep, and was haunted by the silent, knowing gaze she imagined in Layla's eyes. The house, once a place of routine and control, now seemed alive with judgment, echoing every failed plan. She muttered to herself, berating her own inadequacy, and increasingly questioned whether she could ever subdue a power she did not understand. Fear transformed her envy into desperation, leaving her isolated and trembling, while Layla, calm and resolute, continued to flourish under the fire's gentle, protective glow. Selma's growing terror was a silent acknowledgement of Layla's emerging strength. The cruel stepmother understood, perhaps for the first time, that true power did not lie in fear or domination but in the courage and purity that the fire recognized in Layla. With every failed attempt, every night spent in haunted sleeplessness, Selma realized she was no longer the master of her household. She was a spectator to a magic that respected only its rightful owner. Her panic deepened, her schemes faltered, and the fire, ever faithful to Layla, continued to illuminate the girl's path, untouchable, radiant, and unstoppable. Selma, desperate and increasingly unhinged, devised another plan to harm Layla. This time she chose a quiet evening, thinking the girl would be alone in her small room, unaware of the danger. She stacked old crates, loose boards, and dried kindling around the door, intending to trap Layla and let the flames consume her. Her hands shook as she lit a match, the tiny flame at its tip reflecting the malice in her eyes. She thought she had finally engineered a situation from which Layla could not escape, but the moment the fire caught, the air changed. Flames twisted and turned in ways Selma could not control, as though guided by an unseen intelligence. They curved gracefully around Layla, creating a glowing barrier that separated her from the dangerous kindling. Each attempt Selma made to push the fire closer resulted only in the flames reacting defensively, forming shapes and walls that redirected her own attacks. The fire had learned, it seemed, not only to protect but to anticipate, reading the intentions behind each malicious movement. As Selma lunged toward Layla, the fire expanded, forming illusions of multiple girls moving through the room. Confused and terrified, Selma could not tell which was the real Layla. Each shadow, each flicker of light, seemed to evade her grasp, forcing her back. Her own traps were turned against her, with boards collapsing harmlessly and sparks dancing harmlessly around Layla while singeing nothing but the air. It was as if the fire itself were mocking her, demonstrating the futility of cruelty against someone who commanded the elemental power of protection. Layla, calm and composed, moved through the room with effortless grace. She raised her hand and the fire obeyed, not as a wild beast but as a guardian, a loyal companion. It formed arches and spirals, creating paths that allowed her to navigate safely while keeping Selma trapped in a maze of flame and illusions. Each movement she made strengthened the bond, her courage feeding the fire's brilliance, expanding its presence and fortifying its shields. The room glowed with a warm, protective light, highlighting the contrast between Layla's serenity and Selma's chaotic desperation. Outside, the faint glow could be seen through the windows, flickering like a living thing. Villagers walking by paused, sensing something extraordinary. They whispered of strange lights dancing within the house, of shadows moving independently, and of a protective force that seemed to respond to Layla's will. Selma's panic grew with each passing moment, her shouts and threats echoing against the walls only to be swallowed by the flames that refused to yield. Even when Selma tried to force her way through, the fire created barriers that blocked every path. Arching columns of flame rose, reflecting light off mirrors and glass jars, disorienting her further. Every act of cruelty backfired spectacularly, reinforcing Layla's safety and teaching Selma a harsh lesson. No malicious intent could penetrate the protection born of courage, calmness, and inner strength. By the time the night ended, Selma was exhausted, trembling, and defeated. The fire did not consume, it did not harm. It simply stood guard, unwavering in loyalty to its master. Layla emerged untouched, her confidence unshaken, and the house felt alive with warmth and safety, a sanctuary empowered by her connection to the flames. The lesson was clear: cruelty and envy could never overcome the bond between a pure heart and a force that recognizes it. The fire's protection had grown not as a weapon, but as a testament to Layla's resilience, patience, and calm spirit. Every attempt to destroy her only illuminated her power further, and Selma's fear became permanent, an unspoken acknowledgement that the girl she sought to harm was untouchable, guided by a force far greater than her malice. For years, Layla's father had been preoccupied with the daily demands of life, caring for the household and tending to village affairs. He had noticed her minor burns, her singed hair on occasion, and the lingering smell of smoke after Selma's attacks, but he dismissed them as accidents. Yet, as Layla moved with calm confidence through the glow of the protective fire one evening, the unmistakable truth became impossible to ignore. The flames twisted and danced around her, forming shields and patterns that seemed alive, moving with a purpose that mirrored Layla's intent. They bent, swirled, and leaped, responding to her gestures and whispering commands as if recognizing her as their master. His breath caught in his throat. This was no ordinary fire. The realization struck him with both awe and horror. Selma's cruelty had been worse than he had imagined, and the girl he had thought helpless had, in truth, been under the guardianship of a force far beyond ordinary understanding. For the first time, he saw the extent of the danger she had faced and the courage she had exhibited silently for all these years. His heart ached with guilt for failing to notice sooner. Selma, meanwhile, had been attempting yet another scheme, sneaking about the house under the cover of dusk, plotting to set another trap. She was unaware that Layla's father had come upon the scene. As he stepped forward, he saw the fire react instantly, forming protective arches around Layla and flaring with bright intensity, almost as if it recognized an ally in him. The flames did not burn him, they welcomed him. Layla's father, overwhelmed by the sight, felt a mixture of fear and reverence. He confronted Selma, his voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "Enough," he roared. "No more lies. No more cruelty. I see now what you have done to her." Selma recoiled, her face pale, realizing that her stepdaughter's secret had been revealed. The power she had tried to suppress and control could not be hidden any longer. The fire, loyal to Layla, flared high, creating walls and columns of dancing light between Selma and the father, a silent warning that any act of aggression would be futile. Layla stood amidst the flames, calm and composed, watching as her father began to understand. She spoke softly, explaining every attempt of Selma's malice, the dangerous tasks, the fires, and the stepmother's relentless envy. The fire responded to her words, glowing brighter with each truth revealed, emphasizing the sincerity and strength of her spirit. Her father listened, shock giving way to sorrow and deep regret. He realized that his distraction and failure to protect her had allowed years of suffering to continue unnoticed. With a newfound determination, he moved closer to Layla, signaling his support and protection. The fire, sensing his intention, wove around him gently, creating a safe passage and forming a protective canopy over both father and daughter. The house, once a place of tension and fear, seemed to breathe with warmth, the flames illuminating corners that had long been shadowed by Selma's cruelty. Selma, unable to penetrate the barrier, became frantic. Her threats fell silent as she recognized that the power she sought to destroy was beyond her reach. Layla's father, steady and resolute, addressed her with authority. "You will harm her no more. The harm you have done will no longer stand. It ends now." Selma's eyes widened with terror, the realization that she had lost all control crashing upon her. For the first time, Layla's father truly saw the magnitude of his daughter's courage, her resilience, and the extraordinary force that had safeguarded her. He vowed never again to allow neglect or doubt to cloud his protection. In that moment, the living fire, responsive and intelligent, symbolized not only Layla's inner strength but also the reconciliation and unity of father and daughter, a bond now fortified by trust, love, and the magical guardian that had waited patiently for its master's call. Word of the miraculous fire spread quickly through the village, carried on whispered conversations, curious glances, and the awestruck tales of travelers. Villagers who had once doubted Layla's gentle strength now found themselves drawn to her home, mesmerized by the sight of flames that moved with intention, that shivered and danced as though alive. Mothers brought children to peer through the safe distance of the yard, their eyes wide with wonder. Elders who had once criticized her or dismissed her quiet nature now whispered in reverence about the girl who commanded fire without fear or cruelty. The flames themselves were astonishing. Unlike ordinary fire, they did not consume recklessly. They formed protective barriers around the house, flickering and bending to create tunnels of light that guided the curious and protected the vulnerable. Sometimes, when villagers approached too closely, the fire would lift and swirl, forming shimmering patterns, shapes of birds, flowers, and animals, softly reminding them that this magic was both beautiful and untouchable. The fire reacted to Layla's presence and to the intentions of those around it, revealing the purity of her spirit and the strength of her will. Some villagers were initially fearful. Flames had long been a symbol of danger, of destruction. But as they watched Layla move among the fire with calm authority, interacting with it as if it were a loyal companion, fear gave way to admiration. They noticed how the flames protected her rather than threatened others, how they seemed to glow brighter when she performed acts of kindness, healed injured animals, or comforted children. Slowly, they realized that Layla herself was the source of the magic's intelligence and strength. Stories began to circulate. Farmers who had seen the fire from a distance told neighbors that the flames had shielded Layla from a falling tree, diverted a sudden gust of wind, and even reflected the cruel schemes of Selma harmlessly back upon her. Children insisted they had glimpsed the fire whispering to Layla, forming shapes and letters that conveyed encouragement, guidance, or warning. Every tale painted her as more than human, a guardian figure who wielded her gift not for selfishness, but for protection, courage, and justice. Villagers began approaching her cautiously at first, leaving offerings of fresh water, herbs, or small gifts for the fire. The flames seemed to respond to these gestures of respect, glowing softly in gratitude, strengthening the magical bond that lay at the heart of Layla's life. Elderly women, who had once scolded her for daydreaming or helping animals instead of attending chores, now bowed in deference. Men who had once doubted her strength nodded in acknowledgement. Even skeptics could not deny the undeniable living energy that surrounded her. This growing admiration was not limited to the villagers closest to her home. Travelers passing through told tales of a girl whose fire obeyed her commands, of a spirit that could not be tamed by cruelty, of a protector who embodied courage in its purest form. Layla's story began to inspire songs, whispered prayers, and children's games, creating a legacy rooted in resilience and hope. Yet, despite the attention and awe, Layla remained humble. She did not seek fame or worship. She understood that the fire's purpose was not spectacle, but protection, guidance, and the reminder that strength, courage, and kindness could forge their own path even in the face of envy and malice. The villagers recognized this, feeling both reverence and kinship. They began to see that true power was not in domination or fear, but in harmony with the forces of life, and in Layla, they glimpsed the embodiment of that truth. By nightfall, the village glimmered faintly in the reflected light of Layla's magical fire. It was more than a spectacle, it was a testament, a living reminder that goodness, courage, and inner strength could not be extinguished. The villagers left with hearts warmed, minds inspired, and eyes forever changed, knowing that Layla and her fire were protectors, teachers, and symbols of hope that would endure for generations. With the fire as her steadfast companion, Layla's confidence grew steadily, not in arrogance but in quiet assurance. Every day she walked among the villagers, her presence radiating calm authority. The magical flames that once danced protectively around her home now followed her subtly, guiding her path, warming hearts, and reminding the people that courage and kindness could flourish even in the shadows of cruelty. She understood that her gift was not just a shield, it was a tool to teach, to inspire, and to restore balance in a village long overshadowed by envy and fear. Layla began showing the children how to observe the fire, to see its moods, and to understand the connection between intent and energy. She explained that true strength was not in dominating others, but in protecting them, nurturing them, and using one's gifts for the greater good. The villagers, watching her interactions with the young ones, marveled at the patience and clarity she exhibited. Her wisdom was not taught by elders alone. It was honed through hardship, survival, and a bond with a force that recognized her courage and virtue. Even the adults found themselves drawn to her guidance. Farmers sought her counsel when drought threatened their fields, healers consulted her about remedies for sick livestock, and artisans sought inspiration from the fire's movements. Each act of teaching reinforced the villagers' trust in her, and in return the magical flame seemed to respond with a gentleness that mirrored Layla's own temperament. Through her lessons, the villagers began to understand that strength and compassion could coexist, that adversity could be transformed into guidance, and that fear was only as powerful as one allowed it to be. Selma, once a figure of dominance and intimidation, began to fade from the villagers' attention. The stepmother's schemes, once whispered with subtle menace, were now openly disregarded as people recognized the futility of cruelty against a spirit fortified by both inner strength and magical protection. Every attempt Selma made to regain influence was quietly thwarted by Layla's presence and the ever-watchful fire. The villagers no longer feared the stepmother. They saw only the contrast between fear-driven envy and courage rooted in goodness. Layla's empowerment was not limited to the village alone. Travelers who came through often paused to witness the magical flames, leaving inspired, carrying tales of her courage and compassion far beyond the village borders. Her story became a living lesson, that adversity could shape wisdom, that fear could give way to empathy, and that even those who seemed powerless could become guardians of their world. By day, Layla was a teacher, a counselor, and a friend. By night, she walked under the stars, the fire dancing around her, silently acknowledging her command, loyalty, and wisdom. The villagers came to understand that her power was not just magical, it was moral, ethical, and transformative. Through patience, guidance, and a bond with a force beyond ordinary understanding, Layla reshaped the village's heart, turning fear into courage, doubt into hope, and cruelty into humility. Her influence endured, not through domination or control, but through example, compassion, and the unwavering connection between a girl and the living fire that recognized her as its master. Layla had grown into a symbol of empowerment, a beacon of light that would guide generations to come.